is MorningLine with Nick Beres.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. I'm Nick Beres, coming to you on this Tuesday. Good show as always on tap, and as always, I'll invite you to join in the conversation. We'll get the phone number up there. Wow, look at that. Just pops up just like that. First, let me tell you what the show's about today. I think many of us sitting at home watching either perhaps are being cared for by someone, depending on your situation, or you are in some capacity maybe a caregiver for someone else. And that could be anything from a child, of course, if you're raising children, but I'm talking more about maybe like my situation where my brother and I are looking out for our elderly parents. And there's people out there dealing with things like Alzheimer's, memory loss, and folks that need caregiving maybe before they end up going to an assisted living facility. A lot of times that's something that can't be afforded, and so you have family members being the caregivers. And I'll tell you this, what you need is a caregiver for the caregiver, because it can be an overwhelming job. And you know, you do this for your loved ones, but there's help out there available, and you're not alone if you're in that situation. We're going to talk about that. The issue of caregivers, and one reason, because this is National Family Caregivers Month. It's important because caregivers do need love and help. And that's what it's about today. 737-7587. If you'd like to share your story or join in the conversation with us this morning, we have Dr. Shane Kuhlman. He's the Chief Psychology Officer for Centerstone Research Institute. It's nice to have you on.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, Megan Powell is here as well. You are a caregiver and an Elizabeth Dole Foundation Fellow.
Yes, nice to be here.
Why don't we start, Doctor? Maybe just remind folks what Centerstone and the Research Institute's all about.
Yeah, so Centerstone is a community behavioral health organization. We are actually in 4 states, Tennessee, Florida, Illinois, and Indiana. And we're about serving the community, really. We have a lot of outpatient facilities. We have residential mental health facilities. We have an inpatient facility in Florida as well, focused on improving the mental health and well-being, of our community.
Yep. All right. Yep. And then Megan, I guess you're probably familiar with Centerstone, but I know you can tell us a bit about the Dole Foundation, but also, you have a personal story. You're a caregiver.
Mm-hmm. I am. So I am a caregiver for my husband, who suffers from PTSD and TBI from his 14 years of military experience. And through that, we spent 3 years trying to get him care, trying to get diagnosis in the active duty military system, and realized it is not for the caregiver. It was hard for me to be connected to his care. Providers did not want to speak to me. It was 3 years of just, you're told, hey, he emails me and says, hey, I think I have PTSD. Well, obviously the first thing you do is, you reach for a therapist, and you're told, well, it's going to be, 3 months before you can be seen. So my job became, okay, how do we get around this, and how do we find somebody to help faster than that? And suddenly one day I went, well, I guess I'm a caregiver. I don't caregive in the way that some do, because we have a lot of, especially on the military side, you have a lot of amputees and you have a lot of physical injuries, and that's when you think of a military caregiver, that's where your mind goes. It doesn't go to somebody that's caring for invisible wounds, but there are a lot of us out there that do that job every day. And through that, thank goodness, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, Senator Dole, years ago, met one of our caregivers, actually from Fort Campbell, while her husband was at Walter Reed, and she realized there was a gap and that caregivers weren't being taken care of. And so she said, okay, this stops. And she formed the foundation. The foundation is 10 years old. And one of the things that the foundation does is it brings on fellows. And we get to share our story, and we get to try to help caregivers. And I've been able to use our story to hopefully bring about change, that nobody else has to walk the road that we've walked.
Yeah, and it can be overwhelming. Caregivers, and if you don't care for the caregivers, then that hurts the individuals that really need the help, who are there. Dr. Kuhlman, then she just talked about caregivers and the burdens they face. I can just imagine. Maybe give me, in your mind and what you see, the examples, then we'll have some of your personal story on this, of the things that you have to juggle. I mean, your caregiver, many of them, first of all, I understand more than half of them are women, okay? And then a lot of them have jobs outside of the job of caring for another human being almost 24/7. What are the hurdles?
I think one of the main things you just mentioned, these are unpaid caregivers,
Yeah,
right? When you look at unpaid caregivers, they're doing something and something else nearly all of the time. I think you are juggling being that person's primary person and also their primary person in another role. You're having to juggle multiple roles at the same time. I think that's huge for that primary caregiver, because you may be in a caregiver role, but you're also still that person's husband, that person's father, that person's brother.
And so you're intimately knowing what the situation is. But I'm thinking too, and I've gone through this some with my parents when they start getting dementia, but I mean, there's special skills and knowledge that has to come with some of this. And a lot of these folks are just thrown into it. It's one thing if you're helping someone who needs to get up because maybe, the hidden injuries are almost more difficult to diagnose and deal with than someone maybe who had an amputated leg. Okay, you know that. They're going to need help. They'll need the crutches to get around. It's awful, but it's different. How do you even know what's right to do with someone who's having Alzheimer's if you're just someone who, out of the blue, this is happening to your loved one?
I think getting support from others, talking to peers, talking to support groups, those, as well as talking to experts, getting all the information. One thing I had thought about, is that there's a lot of societal understanding of things like caregiving for someone with Alzheimer's, for someone, with dementia. That's the more known of the caregiving, although there's still a lot of unknowns with that. Whereas these hidden caregivers or the hidden disabilities, like when you think of things like PTSD or things like TBI, those caregivers may not have a good understanding of what to do. There's not really a societal baseline of what to do for those things. It's not talked about, it's not understood. So really just reaching out to others who have gone through those peer support groups, really, as well as reaching out to experts.
Yeah, I guess there's the information there. So Megan, I don't know how detailed you want to get into, but you say your husband has PTSD and traumatic brain injury, and sometimes it's hard to determine what symptom is coming from what. But what type of things do you deal with? What does he kind of go through? And I'm sure what you're going to do here is echoed by others, especially in our community here with Fort Campbell nearby that deal with this. What do you see?
So I always say I am the emotional caregiver. We were talking earlier, right now, short-term memory is not really a thing for my husband.
Give me, for how quickly will he perhaps lose a recall?
It kind of depends on the day. He can remember years. He can remember 10 years ago. He can remember things that I don't remember. But to remember something from 2 days ago.
What he had for dinner last night?
Yeah, of a conversation that we had.
I forget that myself. But
we'll have a conversation about, hey, we're going to do this on this day, and he will acknowledge it, and then we'll come back a couple of days later and he'll say, hey, what are we doing on Saturday? Well, I already told you. So for me, it becomes, I have to be careful because I tend to get very frustrated very quickly. So it's well, why don't you remember? And then you have to stop yourself and you have to go, oh, wait, this is not him. I spend a lot of time trying to separate him from his diagnosis because they're two different things. So for me, it's, and then it's also, when we go into a restaurant, it sounds so cliche because it's what you do here on TV shows, but it is the truth. When we go into a restaurant, I literally have to think, okay, I need to sit where my back is to the door because my husband does not like for his back to be to the door because he can't see who's coming through the door.
Okay, I've heard of that. That's interesting because he would be very uncomfortable not knowing because of his experience in the military. So you have to find a table where he can sit up against a wall.
Yeah, if he has a full line of sight of the restaurant we're in, it's a whole lot better. Now he is good. He is really good about it's okay. But you can kind of see if he ends up, if we can't get a table to where we can put him in that position, then you can see he's very anxious.
You want him to enjoy his meal and be comfortable. I mean, of course.
It's things like that. It's telling our son, we have a 6-year-old son who has done this whole road with us. And a lot of times it's telling him, hey, buddy, I know you're really excited right now. Christmas is fun for us, but it can also be a huge headache for us because we're in a room full of family and, kids get excited when they open their presents. And so I've got a really excited 6-year-old that I have to look at and say, hey, buddy, can you just take it down a little bit? I know you're really excited, but daddy's Daddy's, we call it a stormy day. I need you to back it down just a little bit. So a lot of it is kind of running, I call it emotional interference, because it's a whole lot easier if you can just take on, if you can see something coming down the road that's going to upset him. It's a whole lot easier if you can just take it on and cut it off at the pass than going through him being triggered and an anxiety fit, because it doesn't stop.
Is he working? So will he, I mean, like right now, what's he doing?
Yeah, he actually, strangely enough, he works for Centerstone too. He's a project manager at Centerstone. So we laugh and say, well, you know, God had a different plan for us than we thought, because he has a mental health issue, but he works for a mental health company.
You think he can relate to others.
Exactly.
I mean, that's fantastic. So he's functional and does it. It's not like someone has to be with him all day at home. And we have to take a break. And there's a lot that are like your husband. And then there's others who really, you know, especially when they get older and they have the dementia, you can't leave them alone. And it is a tough thing. So we'll come back. We can take some phone calls if you'd like to share a story with us as well. But obviously, as we move forward in this, we're going to talk about the help that's out there, and you know, everything from the Dole Foundation to what Centerstone can do and what you can do when you're up against it. And it can be overwhelming, I'll tell you. We'll be back with more, talking about caregivers right after this.